"Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" The innocent voice of a little girl cut through the cold night air as she tugged at her father's hand. On the hard pavement, under the flickering glow of a streetlight, lay a young woman, shivering, fragile, and completely alone. The millionaire single dad paused, torn between the world of comfort he knew and the haunting sight before him. In that moment, it wasn't wealth or status that mattered, it was humanity. The girl's wide, questioning eyes forced him to make a choice that would change all their lives forever. He bent down, gently lifted the stranger into his arms, and carried her home, not knowing that this one act of kindness would unravel secrets, test the strength of his heart, and redefine what it truly means to be a family. The night was quiet except for the soft crunch of footsteps on the pavement. A father holding his daughter's hand as they walked back to their car. The man's life had been built on power, discipline, and control. He was a millionaire, a respected businessman, and a single father who carried the weight of responsibility for his little girl. His world was one of order and structure, until his daughter's small voice cut through the silence with a question that pierced deeper than any boardroom challenge. "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" The child's eyes were wide, innocent, and filled with confusion as she pointed to the young woman lying on the sidewalk, curled up against the biting wind. The father looked down at the fragile figure on the cold ground. Her clothes were worn, her hair messy, her face pale. She wasn't much older than a college student, yet life had already taken so much from her. He hesitated, caught in the gap between the comfortable world he had built for his daughter and the harsh reality that played out before them. In that moment, he wanted to shield his little girl from the ugliness of the world, but her question lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Children had a way of exposing truth with a single sentence, and her innocent curiosity demanded an answer. The father knelt beside his daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, trying to find the right words. But the truth was too heavy. How could he explain to a child why someone had no place to go? How could he tell her that the world was unfair, that some people fall through the cracks, and that money and power could never erase suffering completely? He sighed, realizing that maybe the explanation wasn't what his daughter needed. Maybe what she truly needed was an example. The little girl's small hand slipped from his and reached out toward the woman on the ground. "She looks cold." "Daddy," she whispered. Those words were enough. The father felt something stir deep inside him, a reminder of the man he once was before success and wealth built walls around his heart. It wasn't pity he felt. It was responsibility, not just as a father, but as a human being. His daughter's innocent question had torn through the armor he wore every day. He bent down, gently touching the woman's shoulder. She flinched at first, startled by the sudden contact, her eyes blinking open with fear and exhaustion. Her voice was barely audible as she muttered something about being fine, about not wanting trouble. But the father could see through her words. She wasn't fine, not by any measure. He glanced back at his daughter, who stood silently watching, her little heart already forming compassion stronger than most adults. "Daddy, can we help her?" she asked again, softly but firmly, as though she would not accept silence as an answer. In that moment, the millionaire realized that all the success he had achieved meant nothing if he couldn't teach his daughter kindness. All the luxury, the mansions, the cars, the financial security, it was hollow if it didn't come with humanity. He reached out his hand to the young woman, offering her not just support but dignity. "You don't have to stay out here," he said gently. "Let us help you." The woman hesitated, her pride and fear wrestling against the exhaustion written all over her face. She shook her head weakly, but his daughter's soft, innocent gaze melted her defenses. The little girl stepped closer, wrapping her small jacket tighter around herself as she whispered, "You can come with us. My daddy is nice." That broke something inside the young woman. Tears welled in her eyes, not because she felt weak, but because she hadn't felt seen or cared for in such a long time. The father carefully helped her to her feet, steadying her trembling body. She was light, almost fragile, as though the weight of the world had drained every bit of strength she had left. His daughter clung to his arm, watching with the quiet pride of a child who believed her father could fix anything. He realized then that his daughter wasn't just asking why the woman was sleeping there. She was asking why kindness should ever have boundaries. As they walked together toward the car, the father glanced at his daughter, who looked up at him with a smile both innocent and wise. He knew this moment would stay with her forever. She would remember not just the question she asked, but the answer he gave through his actions. And perhaps, years later, when she faced her own choices, she would recall the night her father taught her that compassion was stronger than wealth. The young woman sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes darting nervously, unsure of what to expect. She had been pushed away so many times before that trust felt like a foreign language. But she noticed the way the little girl turned in her seat, smiling warmly at her, offering her half of a candy she had saved from earlier. The gesture was so small yet so powerful, because it wasn't filtered by judgment. It was pure, innocent giving. The father caught this moment in the rearview mirror and felt a swell of emotion he hadn't known in years. His daughter was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. Driving home, he thought about the life he had built. He had worked tirelessly to secure his daughter's future, but perhaps he had forgotten the most important lesson of all: the value of compassion, the strength of kindness, and the courage it takes to care for a stranger. His daughter's question had been simple, yet it had shaken him to the core, reminding him that the true measure of wealth wasn't found in bank accounts or possessions, but in the way one's heart responded to another's pain. That night, when they finally stepped into the warmth of their home, the father knew life would never be the same again. All because a little girl asked one simple, piercing question, "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" The house was quiet when they arrived, the kind of silence that seemed to carry the weight of uncertainty. The young woman stepped inside hesitantly, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she feared she didn't belong in a place so warm, so safe, so far removed from the cold concrete she had known just hours earlier. The father noticed the way she lingered near the door, as if ready to flee at the first sign of rejection. His daughter, however, was already tugging at the girl's hand, with childlike excitement, eager to show her the living room, the soft couch, and the basket of blankets she thought would make her comfortable. To the little girl, kindness was simple. You see someone hurting, you share what you have. The father watched quietly, moved by his daughter's pure heart. He could see the struggle in the woman's eyes, the way she tried to mask her fear with polite gratitude. It wasn't easy to accept help when life had taught her to expect nothing but abandonment. He understood that her walls weren't built out of arrogance but survival. Still, he had made a choice that night, not only for her sake but for his daughter's. This act of kindness had to mean something. It had to teach his little girl that compassion wasn't an occasional gesture, it was a way of life. He prepared a warm meal, simple but comforting, and set it on the table. The young woman hesitated before sitting down, as though she was unworthy of sharing the same space. His daughter plopped into her chair, chattering away about school, her drawings, and the bedtime stories she loved. Slowly, the tension in the room softened. The woman smiled faintly, a smile that carried both gratitude and pain. She hadn't shared a meal with anyone in so long that the simple act of eating together felt overwhelming. As the night deepened, the father found himself watching her closely, wondering what twists of fate had led her to that lonely street corner. He could tell she was educated by the way she spoke, careful yet articulate. Her hands trembled slightly, not just from exhaustion, but from the invisible scars she carried. His daughter eventually drifted off to sleep on the couch, curled under a blanket, leaving the two adults in a silence that was both fragile and heavy. The woman finally whispered, "You didn't have to do this." He met her eyes and replied, "Maybe not. But sometimes the things we don't have to do are the ones that matter most." She looked away, tears forming, and he realized that kindness, to her, felt almost foreign. She confessed bits of her story, though not all. She had lost her family. Circumstances had stolen her security, and pride had kept her from asking for help. The streets had been cruel, yet she had learned to survive. But survival was not the same as living, and tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt human again. The father listened carefully, resisting the urge to offer quick solutions. Instead, he let her words pour out, unfiltered, as though they had been waiting for years to be spoken. He realized that kindness wasn't about fixing someone's life in an instant. It was about giving them the space to breathe, to feel, to remember that they mattered. In that moment, he wasn't a millionaire or a man with influence. He was simply human, sitting across from another human who needed compassion more than anything else. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a single act of kindness grew into something none of them had expected. The young woman found her strength slowly returning, not just physically but emotionally. She began helping around the house, teaching his daughter little songs, laughing at her stories, and even daring to hope again. The father noticed the change, not only in her but in himself. His life had been dominated by business deals and endless responsibilities, but now, when he came home, he found himself looking forward to the sound of laughter that filled the once quiet rooms. His daughter adored the young woman, following her like a shadow, asking endless questions, and learning small but important lessons about resilience and kindness. The bond between them was natural, unforced, and pure. The father couldn't ignore the warmth it brought into their lives. He had thought he was teaching his daughter a lesson about compassion, but in truth, they were all being transformed by it. Yet, with every step forward came the weight of unanswered questions. Who was she really? What had driven her to the streets? There was a dignity in the way she carried herself, even in her struggles, that suggested there was more to her story. At times, he caught glimpses of something deeper in her eyes, a shadow of secrets untold. He didn't press her, but the curiosity lingered, pulling at the edges of his thoughts. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, she noticed a framed photograph of his late wife on the mantel. She stared at it quietly, as though trying to understand the life he had lived before their paths crossed. He explained, his voice tinged with sorrow, how he had lost the love of his life and how raising his daughter alone had been both the hardest and most rewarding journey. To his surprise, she didn't respond with pity, but with understanding. She simply nodded and said softly, "Loss changes us, but it doesn't have to break us." Her words struck him deeply, revealing a strength he hadn't realized she carried. In the quiet moments that followed, the father reflected on how much had changed since that night. A single question from his daughter had unraveled the walls around his heart. A single choice to extend kindness had brought a stranger into their lives who was no longer a stranger at all. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew that this act of compassion had set them all on a path toward healing, hope, and perhaps something even greater than any of them could imagine. For the young woman, what began as a night of desperation had become the beginning of a second chance. For the father, what began as an obligation had become a journey back to the core of who he was. And for his daughter, what began as a simple question had turned into the most powerful lesson of her life, that one act of kindness, no matter how small, can change everything.